Well, yeah, it's pretty dangerous out there, isn't it? Those were just a selection of the close passes that we've had. Some you might not consider too close, some were very close, but the fact is pretty much all of those were prosecuted. I don't go looking to prosecute drivers, I don't get any pleasure out of it, but I do think we all owe it to each other to keep each other safe by calling out dangerous drivers. Now, I know some of you have commented that the police don't take any notice and they're not interested and so on. My experience has been quite the opposite, apart from one force, and I'll talk about that another time. But what I will do in a follow-up to this is just go through what the reporting process is, how easy it is. It takes me probably 10 minutes maximum. And interestingly, on one of our short guided rides on Tuesday, I reported a close pass to Lincolnshire Police, and I actually had a decision the following day. And that decision is that they'll be taking some form of action. Now, most of my close passes have been recorded on my Mark 1 Chilli Tech camera. I bought that camera in November 2019, so it's coming up for 5 years of use, and it's still going strong. And I think Paul at Chilli Tech probably thought it was time I changed the camera. So he invited me to try their Pro 2 camera, which I did. And I actually made a complete review of it. But then I was told by Paul that he wanted to change the camera that he supplies. And the reason is that Chilli Tech always try to give good value. And the Pro 2 camera was in fact just over £100, but he felt that his new 4K camera, which was retailing just under the £100, was actually doing just as good a job, if not better in some ways. So I had to scrap that video and start all over again. That's taken me about a year, partly because of testing and so on, and partly I needed to do some low light shots, and you know, it meant going out at 11 o'clock at night to get them. So now seems the right time to put that video out. We're getting nearer to the time where low light's important, and we're going to test the 4K camera in low light. But before we do that, I want to just talk about Chilli Tech as a company. They try to keep their prices low, and you'll see an example of that later on. And they keep their prices low by not having a huge staff. So there are times when we contact Paul and we don't get a reply for a couple of days, and we have to chase him up because you're probably catching him while maybe he's on a buying trip visiting a factory, or maybe he's just unloading a container of cameras. So what I would say is, if you are the sort of person that requires an instant response from a customer service operation, then don't use Chilli Tech, because that's not what you can expect. What they'd rather do is keep the operation relatively small and ensure that we get good prices. So if you want the instant responses from a customer service operation, then obviously talk to somebody else. You'll probably pay 4 times as much for the same sort of quality camera. That's obviously your choice. Now, as I said, my Mark 1 Chilli Tech is still going strong. It does have a couple of drawbacks, and one is that if you change the battery, which is easy to do, you will lose the date and the time. Now, that's not been a problem to me. It's not an issue because the police are interested in your statement. The other drawback with the Mark 1 is that the operation light is blue, and it's very difficult to see, especially if you're in blue light. I'm pleased to say that on the Mark 2 and all the other cameras, that's now been changed to green, and it is much more visible in any light conditions. The shots you're seeing now are all shots that I've taken with the Mark 1. Now, I make it very clear these are not close passes. The drivers concerned did nothing wrong, but I wanted to show you the capability of the camera in various lighting conditions. And as you'll see, it will easily pick up a number plate even if it's a wide pass. And as you'll see, in low light conditions, then it really is very poor. So if you're riding mainly in the daytime in reasonable conditions, then the Mark 1 is plenty good enough, and it has proven to be for me. So I took out the Pro 2 bullet camera and the Mark 1 together on the same ride to get some night shots. And just as we were approaching home, this happened. Now, this was a driver that ignored the fact that we were coming towards them. They'd got to pass a parked car. We, as you'll be able to make out from the clip, had our headlights on. So we were very, very clearly coming through, and the driver just decided they'd ignore us. That driver was prosecuted. But they weren't prosecuted on the evidence of the Mark 1 because you'll see it was impossible to see the number plate. But the Pro 2 camera did manage to catch the image. Now even then it wasn't an easy catch, and what you're seeing here is one frame where I got the first part of the number plate and I moved it on a frame, and then the second part came into focus. But it was enough for the police to prosecute. Now fortunately, as the car passed me, I got a nice image of the colour, the make and the type. So I was able to go on to the government database and just check that that registration did marry up with that type of vehicle. And clearly the police did the same and they were happy with it. So you'll see that if Paul's claim that the 4K camera was just as good as this, I had a benchmark to work to. The 4K needed to work as well as the Pro 2. And we'll get into that test shortly. But first let's just look at the model range here. So you can see we've got the Mark II, which is the later version of the Mark I I'm using. They then have the mid-range model, which is 1080p recording, and it has wireless connectivity to an app. So it means you can set the thing up through an app, you can download your images and so on through an app if you wish. I know a couple of people using this and they're very, very pleased with it. One downside of this camera is that you can't change the battery. So you've got 5.5 hours use and then that's it. You can't swap the battery over. So for somebody like me that will typically go out for 7 or 8 hours, then that's going to be no good to me unless I take along a power bank. And I'll show you shortly how you can charge on the go. Now the top of the range is the 4K bullet cam, and that has image stabilisation and again app connectivity. And this is what we're testing today. The first two cameras in the range have a fixed frame rate of 30 frames per second, whereas this top of the range 4K camera is actually capable of recording at 60 frames per second. Now at 60 frames per second you're only going to get 1080p quality, you're not going to get 4K. But in all honesty, I cannot really see the point in 4K on this type of camera. You're not going to use it for filming a ride. It's really not going to give you the sort of quality you need. You need a decent action camera to do that. But 60 frames per second, I'd certainly forgo any increase in image quality for 60 frames per second. And you'll see the quality we're getting on 1080p anyway in these upcoming shots. Now forgive me if you know all about frame rates, but I am conscious that some people might not see the significance of different frame rates. So if we consider that any video or film or whatever is made up of lots of individual shots, but with the subject moving on slightly each time. So that means with 30 frames per second, there are 30 of these images taken and played back every second. And if you take yourself back to those childhood flicker books, that's exactly what's going on here. The faster you flick those books, then the better the animation. And it's just the same with a camera. So looking at this image, you can see graphically how that works. Now, why that's important with a bullet camera is that if you have a car approaching you or passing you at very, very high speed, the distance between those images at 30 frames per second is going to be twice as much as that with 60 frames per second. And that can be the difference between you getting a good image of the plate and not. And I've had situations where exactly that's happened. You know, you move on a frame, you're out of focus, you move back a frame, you're out of focus. So 60 frames per second will overcome that greatly. The clips you're now seeing were all taken with the 4K camera. These shots were taken in June. Bruce and I did an overnight ride, 136 miles, and we were in the dark for a lot of the time. Now I can't show you any images of when it was pitch dark because we didn't see any traffic, amazingly, but it was pretty dark, although the conditions were clear. But as you can see on most of these, you can clearly see the number plate. In some cases it's clearer than others. You have to do a little bit of squinting to see them. But there was this final one that passed us, and I think the bulb in the number plate was quite dim, and certainly you wouldn't be able to pick this one out. Now, one of the things you'll need to do to make sure that you get the best out of any of these cameras is upload your video onto some form of video editor, just one of the free ones that comes with your PC, or you can download something off the internet for free. Benefit of uploading to a video editor is that you can play frame by frame, and that will allow you to get the best image of the number plate. But now we come to what I consider the greatest feature of this camera, and for me, for the extra £20 you'd pay between the mid-range and the top of the range, I think this feature alone is worth it, and that's image stabilisation. Now, to give you an idea of how powerful the image stabilisation is, I rode through the market square in Newark, which is cobbled. Now, to give yourself a reference point, if you look at my handlebar on the left, you can see how much it's shaking around on those cobbles, but you'll see that the image is pretty rock steady. And to give you a comparison between the other cameras that don't have image stabilisation and this camera, I mounted my Mark 1, now bear in mind it is only the Mark 1, and the 4K with the image stabilisation on either side of my handlebar and rode along the canal towpath. And you can see here that the image at the top is of the Mark 1 and the 4K is down below with the image stabilisation, and I think that says it all. If you're on a rough road, as most of our roads in the UK seem to be at the moment, then your camera vibration could be enough to blur the image of a number plate, and this image stabilisation will make all the difference. Now, it's not all good news with this camera, because the bad news is, because of the extra demands on the camera, you're only going to get around 2.5 hours of operation on a charge, and you can't change the battery. Now, for most people, this is going to be fine if they're using it on a commute, where this camera would be an ideal addition on the bike. However, if you're on longer rides, and something I've been doing, you can take a power bank with you. Now, the only issue with that is that to connect the USB-C connector into the camera, you've got to take the protection cap off, and that's going to allow the ingress of water. But what you can buy as an extra from Chilli Tech is their screw-on power cap, and that literally is a USB-C cable inside a power cap, and that allows you to screw it on and keep the water out. And typically I would expect any retailer, they're probably going to charge you £15–20 for something like that, because it's got the cap with it, but not Chilli Tech. It's the grand total of £6. So again, if it's something you're going to use in inclement weather and you think you're going to need more than 2.5 hours, then certainly I would recommend buying that cap. All of these cameras have a microphone, so they'll record sound. I do find you get a lot of noise from the bike. However, I do understand on the latest cameras that that sound has been enhanced, so you can record a conversation you may have, say, if there has been an accident or whatever. Personally, I don't bother with it. I have the sound switched off, and it's never caused me a problem with the police. One other thing we need to think about, especially with the 4K, is that when the SD card is full, then it will start overwriting the previous clips. Now you can set it so it doesn't do that, but then you won't be able to take any more video. There's nothing worse than being on a long ride when early on in the ride you get a close pass and then you're worried that that's going to be overwritten. So on this 4K camera, I was actually using a 64GB card just to make sure that it wasn't overwriting, because it's using a lot more data. On the mid-range camera and the 4K, they do operate via an app, and that's where you set everything up regarding loop recording, whether you want sound or not. And what's useful is that once you connect the app, that will automatically update the time and date for you. One other area that can be a problem with bullet cameras is the type of mount you're using. My Mark 1 had a fairly basic mount supplied with it, but it was fine. It was the type of thing that just fitted on with bands, didn't get any vibration with it as such, which was good. But the good news is that the Chilli Tech cameras now are coming with this superb aluminium mount. Now, I've been using this with this camera, and I find it so easy to use, because you just undo the clasp, take your camera out and away you go. But when fixed in, the camera's very secure, and I've found it to be very, very stable. One of the latest additions to the Chilli Tech camera range is their rear-facing camera. Now, I've not had the chance to try that yet, but that's going to be the next camera we try and review. And when that arrives, I'll be using that in all sorts of conditions as we ride over winter. So I'll report back on the progress of that sooner rather than later. And in some ways, I feel that a rear-facing camera is probably more beneficial than a front-facing camera, because the time I was hit from behind and knocked off, the front-facing camera wouldn't have picked up the car that knocked me off, because by then it was pointing upwards as the bike was on the ground. So a rear-facing camera is going to give you the same close pass information, but it's also going to record an approaching car that could hit you. So in some ways, I think if you're having one camera, the rear facing's got to be the best option, but ideally you want one either end of the bike. One thing you have to be careful of with any traffic camera is that the lens is going to be police compliant, as it were, because some lenses are fisheye type and they distort the image so much that the police can't use that in evidence. But all of the Chilli Tech cameras have lenses that are police compliant. Now, even if you don't decide to buy a camera, I would certainly be using one of these, the Pass Pixie. I did cover that a little while ago, and I use this now all the time, and it really does have the desired effect. In fact, sometimes cars sit behind for too long because they're afraid that you're going to catch them on your camera. So if you're not using a camera, drivers don't know you're not. So one of these is well worth getting hold of. Now, something I should have probably made clear at the start of the video, but I'll certainly make it clear now, is that there's nothing in this for me at all. I don't even keep the camera. I don't get any commission. They don't offer any special discounts because they're always offering discounted deals. And I do find that their best deals come through Facebook. So if you're looking around for the best Chilli Tech deal, sign up to their Facebook page and wait until you see some offers. So my reason for making this video is just to make all of you aware of the capabilities of the cameras and help you understand which would be best for you if you decide to go that way. So thanks for watching, really appreciate it, and hope to see you soon. Bye for now.